the skies once roared with a living river of wings. Passenger pigeons, in their unimaginable billions, darken the sun like a colossal storm front, their synchronized wing beats creating a sound so deafening it drowned out human voices. From the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, from the Atlantic shores to the Mississippi basin, these birds reigned supreme. They were not just birds, they were an unstoppable airborne ecosystem, a force of nature in feathered form. Yet, in a tragic blink of an evolutionary eye, this titanic avian empire was obliterated by human hands. How could a species, once more numerous than all other North American birds combined, be reduced to a lifeless taxidermy exhibit? The story of the passenger pigeon is not just a tale of extinction, it's a warning, a brutal reality check on humanity's reckless dominance over nature. Imagine standing in an open field in Ohio, looking up at a sky that appears to be bleeding shadows. For 6 hours straight, an endless flock of passenger pigeons pours overhead, stretching horizon to horizon. John James Audubon, the legendary ornithologist, estimated flocks to be over a mile wide and 300 miles long. These birds were not measured in thousands or millions, they were counted in billions. Early European settlers described the phenomenon as a feathered storm. The biomass of the passenger pigeon eclipsed that of any animal group on Earth, surpassing even the great African wildebeest migrations. This was not merely a species. It was a living, breathing atmospheric phenomenon. Passenger pigeons weren't passive participants in their environment. Their massive flocks shaped entire ecosystems. They were ecosystem engineers, capable of transforming forests in a single nesting season. When they nested, the sheer weight of birds crushed tree branches, sometimes snapping limbs as thick as a man's thigh. The accumulated droppings, piled meters deep, chemically scorched the forest floor, triggering nutrient flushes that reset the botanical clock. In a brutal cycle of destruction and renewal, they created habitats that allowed certain plant and animal species to thrive in their wake. Nature had crafted them as agents of chaos, essential for maintaining the dynamic pulse of eastern North American woodlands. But the arrival of European settlers was a fatal pivot point. Humans armed with an insatiable hunger and industrialized killing methods turned their attention to this avian abundance. Pigeons were slaughtered for meat, feathers, and even sport. Hunting parties armed with shotguns, nets, and sulfurous smoke bombs decimated entire colonies in days. No laws existed to curb this bloodbath. Passenger pigeons were viewed as a limitless commodity. Commercial hunters harvested them by the trainload, shipping tons of meat to urban markets where pigeon pie became a poor man's delicacy. The telegraph and railroads, the symbols of human progress, became instruments of ecological doom, allowing hunters to track and exploit nesting colonies with ruthless efficiency. Yet it wasn't just the relentless slaughter that spelled doom. The passenger pigeon's survival hinged on its colossal numbers. Their breeding success depended on safety in overwhelming numbers, a strategy known as predator satiation. With their population shattered below critical mass, their communal defense mechanisms collapsed. Suddenly, they became easy prey for natural predators, hawks, owls, raccoons, that once stood no chance against the impenetrable bird blizzards. But nesting sites were abandoned, breeding halted. The sky, once alive with a symphony of wings, fell eerily silent. By the late 19th century, sightings became rare curiosities. Nature's invincible flying empire had been reduced to scattered, terrified survivors. On September 1st, 1914, in a solitary cage at the Cincinnati Zoo, Martha, the last known passenger pigeon, died. She was named after Martha Washington, yet her legacy would be a stark monument to humanity's ecological crimes. Her death was not just the extinction of a species, it was the annihilation of a living force that had once reshaped landscapes. Crowds came to view Martha as she sat in lonely captivity, a living ghost from a world humanity had erased. After her death, her body was shipped to the Smithsonian Institution, where she was mounted and displayed under the haunting title, The Last Passenger Pigeon. A brutal, final punctuation mark on an ecological catastrophe engineered by human greed. In the modern era of genetic engineering, The idea of de-extincting the passenger pigeon has ignited scientific and ethical debates. Could we resurrect this sky-dominating titan through advanced CRISPR technology using DNA extracted from preserved specimens? Projects like Revive and Restore aim to bring back ecological analogues of the passenger pigeon, but would a lab-created flock ever recapture the ecological thunderstorm that once roared over the American landscape? Or would it be a hollow echo of a once mighty species, a genetic Frankenstein unfit for a world ravaged by habitat loss and climate change? The resurrection of the passenger pigeon is not just a question of science, it's a moral mirror reflecting our responsibilities as architects of extinction. The annihilation of the passenger pigeon was a perfect storm fueled by industrial greed, ecological ignorance, and technological advances that transformed hunting into genocide. The telegraph allowed hunters to track flocks in real time. Railroads transported the spoils to distant markets. Newspapers advertised pigeon hunts like sporting events. No law, no moral compass stood in the way. Humanity, intoxicated by its technological ascendancy, saw nature's abundance as a warehouse of free resources. The passenger pigeon was simply the first grand-scale victim of this industrial ecological assault. Today, the skies over North America are hauntingly empty compared to the pre-20th century era. The landscapes that once thundered with the pulse of pigeon wings now echo with silence. The forests, no longer churned and fertilized by nesting colonies, have shifted in composition. Oak and beech trees, once dependent on the pigeons for seed dispersal and forest regeneration, have seen their life cycles disrupted. The extinction of the passenger pigeon triggered ecological ripples still felt in the present. It was not just a bird that vanished, it was an entire environmental process that collapsed. The passenger pigeon's extinction should have been a turning point in environmental consciousness. Instead, it became just one chapter in a long book of species eradications. The lessons, though, are crystal clear. No matter how abundant a species appears, unchecked exploitation will eventually grind it into dust. The hubris of seeing nature as an inexhaustible resource is a delusion that has driven countless species to the brink. Today, as humanity faces the sixth mass extinction, the ghost of the passenger pigeon looms large, a feathered spectre reminding us of our capacity for destruction. In an era where species are vanishing at rates unseen since the age of the dinosaurs, the passenger pigeon serves as both a tragic symbol and a prophetic warning. Climate change, habitat destruction, and industrial-scale exploitation are the same engines that obliterated the pigeons, now revved up to global scales. The planet's ecological balance teeters on a knife edge, and humanity stands at a crossroads. Will we heed the lessons written in the feathers of extinct giants, or will we charge forward, blind to the collapse we orchestrate? Before humans mechanized their domination of ecosystems, the passenger pigeon was the uncontested monarch of North America's skies. For thousands of years, these birds operated as a biological superpower, functioning as a keystone species that dictated the dynamics of entire forests. Their evolutionary strategy was simple but effective: exist in numbers so vast that no predator could ever pose a serious threat. Predators could kill thousands, but millions would survive. This wasn't random chance. This was evolutionary warfare perfected by natural selection over millennia. Long before European settlers set foot on the continent, Native American tribes witnessed the spectacle of pigeon migrations. However, indigenous hunting was balanced, guided by cultural respect and ecological understanding. They took only what they needed. But once industrialization gripped the New World, the pigeon's fate was sealed. The very abundance that had protected them for centuries became the Achilles heel that invited their doom. The 19th century marked the darkest period in the passenger pigeon's history. Market hunters turned the pigeon population into a commodity, targeting them with relentless efficiency. Pigeon roasts became local spectacles. Ammunition manufacturers even used pigeon shoots as promotional events to showcase the destructive power of their new shotgun models. Entire families, including women and children, joined in these massacre events, gunning down pigeons by the thousands as a form of weekend entertainment. Newspaper advertisements would announce pigeon nesting sites, attracting droves of commercial hunters who would descend like vultures. Railroads, the pride of industrial America, were refitted to haul away tons of pigeon meat, stacked in crates, barrels, and even in open wagons. The flesh was salted and shipped to feed urban centers, particularly the swelling populations of the working poor. Passenger pigeon meat was so abundant and cheap that it became known as the beef of the poor. But this industrial-scale slaughter was happening at a pace far beyond the pigeon's ability to recover. The extinction of the passenger pigeon wasn't just a disappearance, it was an ecological implosion. The pigeons played a vital role in seed dispersal, nutrient cycling, and forest regeneration. Their droppings, rich in nitrogen, supercharged the growth of certain plants. When the pigeons were wiped out, entire ecosystems destabilized. Oaks, beeches, and chestnuts, tree species that relied heavily on the pigeons for seed distribution, experienced significant shifts in their reproductive cycles. Rodent populations, once controlled by the pigeons' overwhelming presence, exploded in numbers, leading to increased crop damages. The balance between predator and prey, nurtured over centuries, was thrown into chaos. The ripple effects of their extinction reached far beyond ornithology. It was a violent rupture in the interconnected web of life. Humanity didn't just kill a bird species, it detonated a biological time bomb whose shockwaves are still felt across North America's ecosystems today. Let's make no mistake, technology played the executioner's role in the downfall of the passenger pigeon. The telegraph, once hailed as a marvel of human ingenuity, was used to relay the locations of pigeon flocks across vast distances. Hunters, alerted by these messages, could mobilize swiftly, converging on nesting sites with brutal precision. Railroads, expanding like the veins of a mechanized beast, transported hunters to remote pigeon territories and brought back cartloads of slaughtered birds to fuel urban appetites. Even the tools of the kill evolved. Shotguns were loaded with pigeon shot, a specialized ammunition designed to maximize carnage. Hunters would fire blindly into the sky, knowing that the density of the flock ensured a successful hit. Nets capable of ensnaring hundreds of birds in one sweep were deployed across nesting trees, while sulfur fires and smoke bombs choked the pigeons out of their roosts, making them easy pickings. Technology, meant to elevate civilization, became the machinery of avian genocide. Historical records describe nesting colonies so vast that they covered 850 square miles. That's larger than the city of London. One account from 1871 in Wisconsin detailed a nesting site that was 125 miles long and 8 miles wide. Trees buckled under the weight of nesting birds, and forests were reshaped in the aftermath. The ground would be littered with broken branches, crushed eggs, and droppings that piled up several feet deep. Observers spoke of the air being thick with the smell of guano, the sound of constant cooing, a relentless background hum that never ceased. To see a passenger pigeon colony in full force was to witness a biological phenomenon of planetary scale. These weren't just large gatherings, they were mobile biospheres that temporarily transformed entire regions into avian-dominated ecosystems. No predator, no natural disaster had ever put a dent in their dominion, until humans, in their arrogance, decided to take aim. Despite the obvious signs of decline, the scientific community of the 19th century largely failed to intervene. Early conservation movements were embryonic, lacking the political clout or societal support to challenge commercial hunting interests. Ornithologists sounded alarms, but their warnings were drowned out by industrialists who saw nature as a boundless resource to be harvested. Lawmakers dismissed the notion that a species so abundant could ever be at risk. It wasn't until the passenger pigeon population had plummeted to catastrophic lows that public concern began to simmer. But by then, it was too late. Conservation legislation that could have saved them, like hunting restrictions or protected sanctuaries, came years after the last viable breeding populations had been destroyed. The legal protections were enacted not as a means to rescue the species, but as a symbolic gesture of guilt, an empty epitaph on a gravestone already inscribed. The extinction of the passenger pigeon left a psychological scar on the American conscience. For the first time, society had to confront the reality that human activity could erase an entire species from existence. The narrative of human dominion over nature was suddenly tainted with the bitter aftertaste of irreversible loss. Museums, zoos, and educational institutions began to showcase preserved pigeon specimens, not as educational curiosities, but as somber relics of human folly. The passenger pigeon became a cautionary symbol, a feathered martyr in the burgeoning conservation movement. Environmentalists, inspired by the haunting story of the pigeons, pushed for laws that would protect other vulnerable species. The Lacey Act of 1900, which regulated interstate wildlife trade, was in many ways a legislative offspring of the pigeon's tragic demise. The passage of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act in 1918, though too late for the pigeons, was directly influenced by their extinction. When passenger pigeons took to the skies, it wasn't just a migration. It was a moving ecological event of seismic proportions. Their synchronized flocks, often a mile wide and hundreds of miles long, functioned like a living weather system. They dropped guano in such quantities that it altered the chemical composition of the soil. Forest floors, saturated with nitrogen and phosphorus, became supercharged growth zones. Some plants, including species of oak, hickory, and chestnut, evolved specifically to capitalize on the pigeon's nutrient-rich fertilizer. Their mass nesting sites, which decimated trees by sheer weight, triggered a process known as catastrophic pruning. This would allow sunlight to reach the forest floor, fostering a burst of undergrowth that provided food and shelter for countless species. From insects to mammals, entire food chains were indirectly tied to the ecological footprint of the passenger pigeon. Remove the pigeons, and you don't just lose a bird, you gut the entire system. Passenger pigeons didn't rely on speed or camouflage to evade predators. They embraced a biological arms race strategy called predator saturation. The logic was brutal. If you exist in mind-boggling numbers, no predator can consume enough of you to make a dent. Hawks, falcons, owls, and mammalian hunters could only pick off a negligible fraction of a flock that numbered in the billions. For every pigeon killed, 10,000 would survive to breed. This safety in numbers strategy worked flawlessly until humans entered the equation. Unlike natural predators, humans hunted not out of ecological necessity, but for sport, commerce, and sheer exploitation. With guns, nets, and traps, they bypassed nature's checks and balances. Human greed ignored biological limits, turning an evolutionary advantage into a vulnerability that spiraled the species toward oblivion. No technology accelerated the passenger pigeon's path to extinction faster than the railroad. In the 1800s, railroads crisscrossed America like iron arteries, pumping human ambition into previously untapped wilderness. These iron beasts didn't just transport goods and people, they became mobile death wagons for passenger pigeons. Train companies built special cars, equipped with ice storage to haul pigeon carcasses by the ton to urban markets. Telegraph lines, running parallel to the tracks, allowed hunters to track pigeon flocks in real time, ensuring that no colony could find refuge from human onslaught. With this deadly combination of speed and communication, humanity industrialized bird slaughter with factory-like efficiency. What once took weeks of horseback scouting and mule-driven wagons could now be executed in days, with fresh pigeon meat delivered to city markets before it spoiled. By the late 1800s, naturalists began documenting the terrifying speed at which the passenger pigeon population collapsed. Where once skies were blackened by their presence, flocks became rare, then mythic. Entire nesting grounds, once loud with the cacophony of millions of birds, fell eerily silent. Eyewitnesses described the disappearance as surreal, like watching the tide vanish and never return. In 1878, the last large nesting colony was recorded in Petoskey, Michigan. Within just 3 days, professional hunters slaughtered over 50,000 pigeons per day until the colony was wiped out. No juveniles survived to maturity. The reproductive cycle, once protected by sheer volume, had been shattered beyond repair. By the 1890s, passenger pigeon sightings became so scarce that ornithologists treated them as chance miracles. The world had watched a biological superspecies vanish before their eyes, and done nothing to stop it. The market economy viewed passenger pigeons not as wildlife, but as profitable units. Pigeon meat was sold in city markets for as little as 50 cents per dozen. Hunters were paid by the bird, incentivizing mass extermination rather than sustainable harvesting. Pigeon feathers, prized for bedding and fashion, became another commercial avenue that fueled the carnage. The demand was insatiable. Restaurants in New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia advertised pigeon pie and roasted pigeon as delicacies, even as the bird teetered on extinction. Vendors didn't just sell the meat, they sold the experience. Patrons were invited to witness pigeon shoots as entertainment, with live birds released from crates only to be gunned down mid-flight. The commodification of a living species reached grotesque heights, turning a vital ecological player into a disposable product on the shelves of capitalism. Martha, the last passenger pigeon, became an unwilling celebrity in her final years. At the Cincinnati Zoo, she lived in a lonely cage, a living monument to human-driven extinction. People came to see her, some with fascination, others with guilt, but none with the power to reverse the fate sealed by decades of slaughter. When Martha died on September 1, 1914, her body was frozen in a block of ice and sent to the Smithsonian Institution. There, she was taxidermied and displayed as a grim relic, a feathered corpse that symbolized the consequences of human exploitation. Her display label, cold and clinical, read, "Extinct." But that single word carried the weight of an ecological tragedy that resonated across generations. The extinction of the passenger pigeon was a catalyst that ignited the early conservation movement. Public outrage, although too late to save the pigeons, fueled legislative action to prevent future mass exterminations. Influential figures like John Muir and George Bird Grinnell used the pigeon story as a rallying cry, pushing for wildlife protection laws that would eventually birth the Audubon Society and the broader environmental movement. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, one of the first international agreements to protect bird species, was a direct response to the pigeon's extinction. This legislation, though flawed and often bypassed, marked a pivotal shift in humanity's relationship with wildlife. The passenger pigeon had become a martyr, a symbol of what happens when human greed overrides ecological balance. With the advent of genetic engineering, scientists now flirt with the possibility of resurrecting extinct species. Passenger pigeons, preserved in museum collections, provide viable DNA samples that could theoretically be edited into the genome of their closest living relatives, the band-tailed pigeon. But this venture raises profound ethical questions. Should humanity attempt to play God, reviving a species it ruthlessly exterminated? Even if the bird could be brought back, would it have a world to return to? The forests it once dominated have been fragmented, urbanized, and ecologically transformed. Could a resurrected pigeon population ever reclaim its role as a keystone species? Or would it be an ecological orphan, alive but functionally extinct? Perhaps the most insidious legacy of the passenger pigeon's extinction is the phenomenon of ecological amnesia. As generations pass, the sheer scale of the bird's former abundance fades from collective memory. Few can grasp the reality that billions of birds once darkened the skies in living storms. This forgetfulness fosters complacency, allowing new ecological disasters to unfold under the guise of progress. Modern industries repeat the same destructive patterns. Overfishing decimates oceanic ecosystems. Deforestation erases ancient rainforests. Poaching drives rhinos and elephants to the brink. The tools have become more advanced, but the mindset remains tragically unchanged. The passenger pigeon's ghost hovers over these modern crises, a silent witness to humanity's refusal to learn from its mistakes. The passenger pigeon's extinction was a localized disaster with global implications. It was a forewarning of the Anthropocene, the current geological epoch defined by human impact on Earth's systems. Today, species vanish at a rate 1,000 times faster than the natural background rate, a pace reminiscent of mass extinction events like the asteroid impact that ended the age of dinosaurs. But unlike cosmic disasters, this extinction event is orchestrated by a single species. Yes. Habitat destruction, climate change, pollution, and invasive species. Introductions have turned the entire planet into a hunting ground where nothing is safe. The story of the passenger pigeon is no longer an isolated chapter. It is the preface to an ongoing saga of environmental collapse. The annihilation of the passenger pigeon wasn't an isolated anomaly. It was the byproduct of an industrial civilization addicted to overkill. Human history is riddled with examples where abundance is mistaken for infinity. The buffalo hunts of the Great Plains, where herds millions strong were decimated to near extinction, mirror the pigeon holocaust almost step for step. Humanity's technological advancements, railroads, telegraphs, firearms, amplified hunting from survival activity to mechanized extermination. The passenger pigeon was not merely harvested, it was obliterated with assembly line precision. No species, no matter how abundant, can survive when its mortality outpaces its ability to reproduce. The passenger pigeon, with its synchronized, large-scale breeding strategies, required massive colonies to succeed. By fracturing these colonies, hunters disrupted their entire life cycle. It wasn't just bodies that were destroyed, it was the very mechanism by which life perpetuated itself. This brutal efficiency of extermination stands as one of the most rapid, large-scale extinctions ever orchestrated by humans. The extinction of the passenger pigeon was not an event with a singular impact. It triggered cascading effects across North American ecosystems. Seed dispersal patterns collapsed. Predator-prey dynamics were thrown into chaos. Species that had co-evolved alongside the pigeons for millennia, like certain insects, fungi, and small mammals, saw their niches obliterated or radically altered. The forest composition shifted subtly but profoundly. The absence of pigeon-mediated soil enrichment led to nutrient-starved forest floors. This changed which plant species could dominate the understory, altering habitats for countless creatures. The ecological niche once filled by the pigeon, a role of disturbance and renewal, remained vacant. Nothing could replicate the sheer scale of their influence. In ecology, the loss of a keystone species like the passenger pigeon is akin to removing the central pillar from a cathedral. The structure may stand for a while, but collapse is inevitable. While passenger pigeons may be biologically extinct, their genetic material persists in museum specimens, offering both a haunting relic and a faint glimmer of hope. Genomic sequencing projects have meticulously catalogued the pigeon's DNA, opening the door for potential resurrection through advanced biotechnology. Scientists dream of editing the genome of the band-tailed pigeon, its closest living relative, to recreate the passenger pigeon's genetic traits. But science fiction collides with ecological reality here. Even if passenger pigeons could be genetically revived, the environment they once thrived in has been irrevocably transformed. Could flocks of resurrected pigeons navigate a fragmented landscape of urban sprawl, highways, and agriculture? Or would they simply become an artificial curiosity, a laboratory-born echo of a species that needed the wilderness to survive? Martha's taxidermied body, displayed behind glass in Washington, D.C., serves as a guilt monument to the cost of human ignorance. Visitors stare at her lifeless form, their reflections cast upon the glass as a visual reminder of humanity's hand in her species' demise. But static displays do little to invoke the visceral horror of what was lost. The storm-like migrations, the ecological upheavals, the aerial symphonies of wings, all reduced to silent feathers under museum lighting. And yet, Martha's legacy persists, not as a mere symbol of loss, but as a challenge. Will future generations allow the passenger pigeon story to repeat itself with other species? Or will it become the crucible in which a new conservation ethic is forged, one grounded in humility, respect, and an understanding of nature's finite resilience? Scientists now agree that Earth is undergoing its sixth mass extinction, a biological crisis driven not by cosmic impacts or volcanic cataclysms, but by the relentless expansion of human activity. The passenger pigeon story, once a North American tragedy, has become a global omen. Coral reefs bleach into ghost towns. Rainforests fall under chainsaws. Iconic megafauna, like elephants and tigers, teeter on the edge, their numbers dwindling under the same human pressures that erased the pigeons. The mechanisms haven't changed, only the scale has expanded. Overconsumption, Habitat destruction, climate change, and unchecked exploitation form the pillars of this extinction age. The pigeons were merely the first in a long line of casualties. Their ghost now flocks invisibly across the globe, a spectral warning that no species is immune to human indifference. Humanity now stands at a paradoxical crossroad. The very technologies that accelerated extinction could, in theory, become tools of redemption. Satellite monitoring, AI-driven conservation analytics, genetic engineering, and habitat restoration technologies offer unprecedented capabilities to safeguard biodiversity. But technology is a double-edged sword. Without a fundamental shift in ethical and ecological priorities, these tools will serve as nothing more than band-aids on a hemorrhaging planet. The question isn't whether we can bring back passenger pigeons through de-extinction. It's whether we have the collective will to stop driving species into extinction in the first place. The allure of technological solutions must not blind us to the root problem, humanity's pathological tendency to consume without foresight. The extinction of the passenger pigeon transcends data and statistics. It is an emotional scar on the human psyche. To grasp the full magnitude of their loss is to acknowledge our own capacity for short-sighted destruction. It is to reckon with the fact that beauty, abundance, and ecological harmony can vanish in the face of greed. The passenger pigeon is more than a cautionary tale. It is a mirror held up to civilization's face, reflecting both its achievements and its failures. Artists, writers, and environmentalists have since tried to resurrect the pigeons through poetry, paintings, and documentaries, but no artistic rendering can truly capture what it meant to stand beneath a sky alive with billions of synchronized wings. That reality is gone, a vanishing so absolute it sears the soul. The fate of the passenger pigeon forces a fundamental question upon us. What kind of ancestors will we be? Will future generations inherit a planet rich with life, or will they walk through silent forests, reading plaques about species that once were? The pigeons offer a stark narrative of cause and effect, of how abundance can breed complacency, and how ignorance can weaponize technology into instruments of extinction. Their story isn't finished. It reverberates in every conservation effort, every species teetering on the edge, every ecosystem gasping under human pressure. The legacy of the passenger pigeon is ours to shape. We can choose remembrance without action, or we can ignite a renaissance of ecological stewardship that ensures no species meets their fate again. The skies once thundered with the life force of passenger pigeons, a living blizzard of wings that shaped forests, sustained ecosystems, and left human witnesses in awe. Today, that sky stands as a hollow echo of what it once was, a canvas robbed of its most spectacular brushstroke. The extinction of the passenger pigeon was not an accident. It was a calculated, systematic erasure, a warning siren that humanity must never ignore. If the pigeon's story teaches us anything, it is this. Extinction is not just about the loss of a species. It's about the collapse of systems, the shattering of balances, and the forfeiture of irreplaceable beauty. Whether we heed this lesson will define the fate of every species teetering on the edge in the Anthropocene. The passenger pigeon is gone. Their sky is now our mirror, and what we see reflected will depend on the choices we make today.